There we are, landing in denial. So in this part, we talk about what we normally don't talk about, the ways in which extreme right influences our climate movement, either by direct opposition or by providing alternative strands of environmentalism that are extremely racist. We'll take a look. Let's go. So first, kind of revisiting the basic premise, we don't all want the same thing when it comes to environmental policy. It's not just a money game. There are many different divides of sharing, and white supremacy culture is a big divider. So for this lecture series, I have used a lot of examples that are explored in more detail in White Skin, Black Fuel. I'll also be providing some updates with things that happened after I read this book. Like, for instance, the situation that we now have with Italy wasn't, well, it was already the case that there's quite some eco-fascism there, but there's continuous moving politics that also changes. So for me, this book was really important also because often when we talk about climate justice and climate racism, the data is coming from the US or Canada, where basically they've more of the movement has institutions from Indigenous or Black or migrant people that have done the research. So they have numbers and stats of like how particular environmental problems, pollution hit people of color disproportionately. But in this talk, I really didn't put the focus on how environmental pollution hits victims differently, but really how racism has always been an environmental issue. And so really looking through the lens of white supremacy to what even an environment is for different people. So also we're living in this particular moment right now where Europe's far right is marching steadily into the mainstream. Of course, this has been happening for a while, but we see that some parties that were sworn off to hold positions in coalitions, in governments, have managed to wiggle their way in. And it's a particular important moment to look at far-right ecology and how they intersect with climate. Let's go. So in Norway, the book looks at the FRP party or Progress Party, and they really want to send in the rigs and drills as soon as possible. As the leader of the parliamentary group put it to the party congress in 2017, we will pump up every last remaining drop. It bears repeating that this was the party that now exercised direct control over the largest oil and gas reserve in Europe, Ministry of Petroleum and Energy in 2019, led by Sylvie Listhaug, became the fourth FRP politician to run it. Oh yeah, so the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy has been run by this party for 4 consecutive governments. Poland history with coal as source as national pride is also looked at in the book. Also how it intersected with Poland being the host of Climate Summit a few years back and managed to talk with pride of coal while speaking with pride on climate governments. It is a particular kind of split personality. The PIS, Law and Justice, extreme right party, there boasted Poland's stance on coal, its past, present, and future. And so those are both articulations of what the book would call fossil nationalism. It is very much in line with techno racism that actually our fossil fuels make us superior. Then we have Sweden. Recently in 2023, there was an observation that Sweden's far right is the most anti-Green Deal party in EU, and also far right shadow looming over Swedish EU presidency for the half a year. We can expect blockages. So besides fossil fascism, you also have different iterations of denial or subversion of progressive slogans into reactionary slogans. We see kein SUV ist illegal. No SUV is illegal, as a subversion of no human is illegal. Kind of fetishizing the car as a vehicle of entitlement. And that's in Germany. In Austria with the FPÖ, Freedom Party Austria, they highlight climate as a religion. Climate change is a religion. That was Susan Winter, who is very much against Islam. And in the Netherlands, we have a think tank called entail, which informs the Forum for Democracy. And they have folks that say doom scenarios have not been have not come to pass in already for 50 years. They say there is no climate emergency. And also the AfD showed a particular contempt for Greta Thunberg and ableism, calling Greta Thunberg mentally challenged and a fraud. So I'm quite interested also with people who know more about the German situation. It definitely worries me already for a couple of years. Of course, there's been a bigger far-right movement or movements, different iterations. During Corona, a lot of far-right mixing with conspiracy theories. There was the storm, or tried to storm the Reichstag when anti-corona measures and extreme right mixed. And then this year we had the so-called plot to conspire for a coup, where QAnon and extreme rights coalesced, and they already made plans for who was going to become minister of this or minister of that. They were having armed rehearsals or practices. And of course, a few years back, there was already the killing of a politician who wasn't even a left-wing politician, but a politician that spoke out in some way for human rights when it came to migrants. And they had a confiscation of a kill list of the extreme right, and a lot of infiltration into the army. And so when they confiscated a place, there were lots of bullets found, and there were bullets marked from different places in the army in Germany. So this coalition of our infiltration of far-right and army, especially particular forces, is quite worrisome. In Germany, This year, there's been a article published, The Rise in Far-Right Crimes. So police registered 23,000 right-wing extremist crimes and 1,138 violent attacks last year. In the Dutch context, in the last few years, we've seen this kind of, I don't know if it can be called a comeback, but of denial. So Clintel, as a think tank, is proposing things in the European Parliament, and they basically assert that there is no climate emergency. They also are connected with the Heartland. Heartland is another think tank that is quite rich and quite well situated in the US. And yeah, also important to know that already in 2017, like this is not kind of new stuff, Jerry Baudet was meeting in secret with his American racist of the alt-right, this Jared Taylor, which is who is publicly advocating for racial war. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, in the end, we'll see that even some parties like the French with Le Pen advocate climate policy through border control. Others just say climate is bullshit altogether. Others are eco-fascist, but when it all boils down to is that it amps up racism in their environmental policy. So in this whole big series, I've tried to kind of show different entrances of how racism is an environmental issue, from land theft to a conceptualization of who belongs to humanity, to how technology is weaponized against different communities, and how it situates in our economy of capitalism. I think also it's worth stating that there is the jump from mainstream capitalism to ecofascism is sometimes smaller than one would think. So one of the people in history that kind of sits at the dawn of capitalism and the enclosure of the commons is Thomas Malthus, who stated, "A man who is born into the world already possessed, if he cannot get subsistence from his parents on whom he has a just demand, and if society do not want his labor, has no claim of right to the smallest portion of food, and in fact has no business to be where he is. At nature's mighty feast, there is no vacant cover for him. She tells him to be gone and will quickly execute her own orders if he does not work upon the compassion of some of her guests." So this is a very old quote that basically weaponizes the idea of nature having a will of her own, of survival of the fittest, which is then kind of stripped from class oppression and other supremacy culture that puts people in positions of vulnerability. To the eco-fascist quote of Pentti Pinkola, what to do when a ship carrying 100 passengers suddenly capsizes and there is only one lifeboat. When the lifeboat is full, those who hate life will try to load it with more people and sink the lot. Those who love and respect life will take the ship's axe and sever the extra hands that cling to the side. So this is a call to action to lovingly murder other people who are considered to be excess, which really speaks to the eco-fascist way of addressing environmental breakdown. If there's not enough for everyone, get rid of the unwanted elements of society. And this permeates all the way into people that are held up in green spaces and geospaces, such as David Attenborough, and his racist discourse for over decades now. He not only has abused his power in environmental media, making nature documentaries that fetishize nature and misrepresenting the bigger political problems within environmental care. But he has extremely racist views and pertaining to overpopulation myth. So one of his quotes have been, "What are all these famines in Ethiopia? What are they about? They're about too many people for too little land. That's what it's about." And a more recent video where he also talks about human population needs to be stabilized as low as we fairly can. And then you see these images of people of color um, that are connected to the goal of limiting population. So the population myth is old. It was already, I think, around in the time of Malthus, but it doesn't go away. I don't like to spend a lot of time to it, but when it comes to this famine, it's definitely not a case that there's not enough for everyone. But in the case of Ethiopia, actually, they were still exporting food while their own people were starving. So in the famine of 84, 85, which killed 1 million people, Ethiopia was exporting green beans to the UK. There's also a bigger scandal around how aid money didn't really reach the starving people, but different organizations or political powers that used it for weapons rather than food. There's some controversy about that, to what degree that actually happened. But in any case, there are political factors that make sure that some people eat more than others, and it's not an absolute matter. Some other words about busting the population myth. I will read. It was not the baby boom in Africa that ignited large-scale fossil fuel combustion in the early 19th century, nor did a multitude of Muslim babies cause the fires to spread in the 20th century. And when the Chinese emissions exploded around the turn of the millennium, it was not because families in that country suddenly had 3 or 4 children. In countries in parts of Asia and Africa where fertility rates remained high, the people who gave birth to most children were the ones who consumed less fossil fuels, and the people who consumed the most fossil fuels were the ones who stopped having large families. Where the correlation is negative, there cannot be causation. End of that story. So don't want to linger here, but it is something that keeps popping up and permeating into green spaces. But we need to deal with these ecological or ecologies of the right. As Naomi Klein warns us in 2019, scarier than a right wing that denies climate change is one that doesn't. And we should probably be aware that even before climate change, there was a right wing or biological racism or fascism that knew very well how to weaponize idea of biology into politics and really iterates ideological white supremacy. So also the report on the right by Hilary A. Moore talks about different frames of the racist right that exploit the climate crisis, and also how movements can be sensitive to not be entering the slippery slope of adapting to those frames. Throughout this series of talks, I've reiterated time and time again that there is a tension between the violence of the extreme right and the violence of the extreme center, and we cannot be in denial about that too. So while in 2019, different shooters and terrorists that operated based on worrying about climate crisis and overpopulation, or worrying about climate crisis and the decline of the white man, or worrying about ecological collapse and Islam, the majority of violence still took place in the extreme center. So, for example, fossil fuel air pollution causes almost 1 in 5 deaths globally. On average, 4 defenders are killed every week, Earth defenders. And there's been ongoing reports every year that between 3 or 4 Earth defenders are killed by the military or paramilitary that is hired by corporations, extractive corporations, big agribusiness, doing land theft and imposing monocultures. Migrant deaths and seeing the Mediterranean Sea because of politics already being the bloodiest border in the world. So 19,000 passed in 6 years. Those are political deaths. There are political crimes. Black people killed by police in the US between 2014 and 2019. 6,557 people have been killed as far as the records show. And 25% of those killed were Black. And in Brazil, Black youth is killed every 23 minutes, reports say. So we should take note that the violence of eco-fascism, people who use their environmental concerns for genocide, sits in a continuum of violence from the extreme center. Only the extreme center aims to dominate for profit, and the extreme right aims to purge to an idealized, authentic society that is eliminating all other elements that are not perceived as the authentic blood and soil essence. So this sometimes manifests in loners, sometimes in movements, such as with Richard Spencer. In Charlottesville, he used a lot of rhetoric around climate change and protecting the land and soil, the homeland, the Heimat, or in the case of the Jewish National Fund, where they use trees to actually infrastructurally greenwash colonialism, and is the biggest landowner in Palestinian territory. All of these sit in a continuum of violence of the linear, but the linear line leads to genocide because it fetishizes a growth of a particular group and the decline of the commons or the rest. So eco-fascists within the ecologies of the right are a smaller group, but they are particularly violent. Like Naomi Klein said, ecofascism is environmentalism through genocide. Here we have some examples of groups from Italy, Greece, France, and Germany. In Germany, they have some magazines that are coming on a quarterly basis. And They said with the Umwelt, we will no longer surrender the topic of environmental and nature protection to those people who do not care at all for the homeland, the Heimat. So there is an important discourse on belonging and emerging from the land as a concept to otherize and dominate others. And they have a direct line in the Die Kere with Heidegger's work on technology. That's also what their name comes from. So we see the embracing of certain philosophy first that were also linked to Nazism or fascism. In the Dutch context, we see the slippery slope or the sliding scale to be in bed with the extreme right thought and practice, with the party of the animals, which say that they're neither left nor right. And if you go to a climate protest, you will see this is also a very white group, which is often then defended with white people care more about the environment, which we know it's not true. But when we look at the political context, we see that the party of the animals also brought about politicians such as Paul Cliteur, who jumped ship to the Forum for Democratie, and Marianne Thieme, the person who started or led the Party of the Animals, said that the FAD, extreme right, is a young party with who she sees there could be opportunities for working together on animal welfare. We should also note that Paul Cliteur, while being in the Party of the Animals, was already a climate denialist. And the extreme right, FAD, has also linked up with an ultra-conservative religious genootschap, which is Civitas Christiana. It's like a think tank. They are a think tank that inserts their frames into politics against LGBTQI, climate movement, Islam, and anti-racism. They were founded in 2014, and Thierry Baudet, the party leader of the FAD party, was a speaker at their fundraising party. So these kind of concerns often don't make it into environmental spaces, analysis. There's generally an idea of the right not being extreme right, not being factored in to our strategies, but they are leaking into so-called movement spaces or green parties. This also is another example of Milieudefensie, a bigger green NGO here in the Netherlands. It is the Dutch office of the Friends of the Earth. And here you see a history since 98 of people who have wanted to lobby within the Milieudefensie about overpopulation myth. So there was the Groen Rechts group that wanted to do that, to get that into the policy. Again, in 2000, there was Hans IJzerdraad, who brought it as a proposal for discussion in Milieudefensie. Hans IJzerdraad was from Leefbaar Nederland, the party of Pim Fortuyn, a racist party that said, had this board of don't bully cars, but catch criminals. And then Milieudefensie said they had no idea that Hans IJzerdraad presenting these overpopulation discussions at their gatherings or at their vergadering meeting was extreme right. But then in 2018, there was again a motion about overpopulation. And here we see that this was no longer proposed by Groen rechts, but by GroenLinks, by Quintijn Hogeboom. So this was coming from the Bureau of Research of the Green Left Party. And so we see slippery slides of how that kind of permeates. Below we see 5 gentlemen, well, not so gentle, 5 white men who formed the party GroenRechts, which is a new party since 2021, I believe. Within these 5 people, they have a so-called Islam expert and somebody who used to work in the douane, the customs. So we really see their politics as one of bordering and othering. The director of Milieu Defensie, the Green NGO, also repeatedly talked in movement spaces during Corona that we must choose between a green or a black new start after Corona. He was called out by me multiple times that he was using black as a negative metaphor when that really didn't make sense. He could just say we must choose between a green or a fossil fuel to start over, or we can choose between an environmentally friendly or an environmentally destructive path, but he kept using over and over, like he didn't want to be corrected, this binary, green or black. And this really rings true with the discourse of extreme right in the United States, of Ann Coulter, who also keeps iterating, we must choose between a green America and a brown America. And using green as a way to actually make it more white. Final notes. This is a long series. I kind of wanted to combine 3 talks in one, and it led to a lecture series, but I think it's important to situate our work that we do together. This is the only time that I will be providing a lecture series. Other than this, will be very workshop oriented. But these are important things as we'll be working across difference with people and land defenders to really be aware of also the kind of iterations of environmentalism or white supremacy environmentalism within the Europe that we need to reflect on and not just unlearn personally, but collectively and politically. So if we only focus on our own personal learning curve and not political or collective learning curve, I think we will miss out on a bunch of things. Supremacy culture and extractivism are extremely linked and extremely lethal. One of the things to be aware of is that more and more extreme right groups are also embracing this idea of accelerationism. What is accelerationism? Accelerationism is a term used by white supremacists and other extremist groups to refer to their desire to hasten the collapse of society as we know it. Generally, acceleration is used in the context of white genocide conspiracy theories, which believes white people are under threat and are being systemically targeted through immigration and other means. So you'll see eco-fascist iterations of help more bees, plant more trees, save the seas, shoot refugees, which is more than rhetoric. We've seen boats that of Defend Europe group that got out to the sea with the sole purpose to block people providing aid. And also think about the extreme center that does the job of blocking aid with more infrastructure and bureaucracy. So think about the arrest of Sea-Watch Captain Carola Rackete, and when she defied the ban on helping those crossing the sea. Yeah, so keep remembering that there is already a war happening against people trying to flee for safety. This also permeates into framing within movements. This is the Declaration of Rebellion from Extinction Rebellion, which sits at the center of the organization, because it's a shared declaration. Biodiversity is being annihilated around the world. Our seas are poisoned, acidic, and rising. Flooding and desertification will render vast tracts of land uninhabitable and lead to mass migration. So we see here a framing by listing a number of environmental disasters or environmental decays and disruptions, and then putting that into a problem statement where all of these environmental horrors lead to mass migration. Like, that is the problem. Instead of migration being militarized being the problem, mass migration in and of itself is perceived as a threat. So while Extinction Rebellion is a very mixed in its constellation of different players, and there's been really good solidarity work coming out of different groups, at the center there is an idea of being post-politics. So it doesn't reflect on its ideology as much when you think you are beyond it, which obviously no group ever is. And so during Corona, there were appropriations of XR. There were fake posters spread in the UK, which said, "Sink the boat, save the world, save the environment, and mass immigration. How's the world destroy the environment? Only white people care about the environment." And while these are obviously fake, it is easy to appropriate when you already have a framing that talks about migration, not in the language of solidarity and rights, but in framing it as a problem. This is unfortunately not a new thing. It's not a new trap that Extinction Rebellion has fallen in within deep ecology. Groups like Earth First that also come from the UK. There's been a long history of extreme rights thinking and racist thinking. So David Foreman was a person that is very much racist. It's kind of sitting in the strand of loner survival, environmentalism. Within Corona, we've seen multiple iterations that were framing humanity as the problem instead of a certain politics. And of course, Pentti Linkola as an eco-fascist that is putting his work out there for super violent measures. I hope that with this series of talks, I've been able to kind of shed some light on lesser talked dynamics, and not about the racism that is often discussed in rich countries polluted more. Global South countries are hit more with the environmental disasters, but really the racism within environment itself, and that racism is an environmental issue, that it pertains to ideas of land and belonging, our ideas of human race being dividable or not into different races or not, and the ecologies of the right having an important role in our strategies to counter violence, environmental violence, and violence against our communities. This all sits in a series of shapeshifting from the linear, disobedience to the linear, to the circular or the web of life. What that really entails is throwing away the ladder of hierarchy, throwing away the idea of gradual progress, throwing the idea of history becoming better and better, and yeah, burning that idea and actually toppling the ladder into a bridge. I think here is a homework of remembering that this is not a new thing that we need to build when we talk about system change, but it's actually an unlearning, an unsettling, a removing of structures rather than having to build everything from scratch, because the circle is already there, the web is already there. It's just been frustrated by all of these supremacy cultures. Finally, I also like to say that there's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the preferably unheard or the deliberately silenced. This is a quote from Arundhati Roy, and I think it's an important one to also reiterate, as all of these mechanisms of exclusion and oppression are about trashing life, and trashing life is environmental harm. And we'll be working with Indigenous collective, Futuros Indigenous, with people in different positionalities and same aspirations of community care and land defending. And I really look forward to the creative work that's gonna come out of this, and really making space for care practices, cultural practices, remembering, restoring, repairing as a methodology of unlearning and reconnecting and environmental work. I would also like to reiterate that we're all lifelong learners, including myself. So during this course, if there's something that upsets you, if something that I am not aware of and am reproducing because I am been a product of the society I grew up in as well, please, I hope you feel the space to address it with me directly, or in some other way that you can feel comfortable to bring it to my attention and allow me to learn with you. I will close with this work of Victor Ehikamenor I found a while back, very beautiful and kind of reminding me of how I see the remembering work myself. Remembering really speaks to both recalling the forgotten or the erased, as well as becoming member of a whole again, and kind of recognizing that we're all already multiple and not singular, and that we in our body host 2,000 different species, and we're all filled with complexity and processes. And extractive growth can only lead to disaster, and it can only be perpetuated by a degree of supremacy culture. And our environmental agenda should always entail disobedience to supremacy culture that only knows how to create monocultures and loss and damage. And this is just such a beautiful depiction of community to me, of being penetrated and interconnected. Doesn't cover it, just interbeing, and that we're always interbeing with each other. So remembering as a field of transition, I hope this was a useful lecture series, really, to get us started in our workshop and collaborations together. I look forward to seeing you in class, and good luck with the rest of the homework. Ciao, ciao.